This is the fourth talk in the history of Germany between 1815 and 2015. On this one, we're going to be looking at World War One, or the period of total war, or the first attempt at total war. What were the factors that led up to the war? First of all, very much a German reason, Wilhelmian Weltpolitik, world politics, with its blunders and sense of entitlement. In other words, it wanted its place in the sun and therefore was trying to create an empire for itself, which rattled obviously the British and the French. There was the system of alliances, the Entente Cordiale, or the Triple Entente between Russia, France and Great Britain, which saw Germany as a threat, and the Central Powers, or the Triple Alliance of Austria-Hungary, Germany and Italy. Germany being completely surrounded by Russia to the east and France to the west. A series of Balkan Wars as the Ottoman Empire began its full retreat away from southeastern Europe, and German outstanding economic position and economic rivalries meant that countries such as Britain felt very threatened by German output, technical expertise, etc. So here we have the two alliances. We can see Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy in the centre, Russia to the east, France to the west and Britain alongside. Well, that was the position in 1914. Very much so, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in June 1914, leads to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. As a result, Russia stands by its Slavic neighbours and therefore threatens and mobilises against Austria-Hungary. Germany, because of its alliance system, agreed to support Austria-Hungary and therefore had to attack, start a war with Russia and France. And we're going to come to the Schlieffen Plan in a second and how that would work. There was a great deal of enthusiasm from most parties, including the fairly pacifist Social Democratic Party, the Socialist Party. By and large, the majority of them opted for war. Here we have the Schlieffen Plan. The idea here was war by timetable, that German troops would move through Belgium into France, knock out France by marching on to Paris, and then getting onto trains and then transferring over to Russia. Russia, it was considered the fact that it would take very long to mobilise. The French were already ready. There was no point in trying to attack straight across the German-French border, because that was so heavily armed and with a great number of defensive structures already there. So the attack had to go, or the Schlieffen Plan had to go through Belgium. The trouble was with all of this, it failed, mainly because Germany was seen as the aggressor. It didn't take into account recent French and Russian military reforms, that Moltke, the German general in charge, divided his troops. There was a great deal of stiffer resistance. Because of the invasion of Belgium, it brought Britain into the war, because it had a defensive agreement with Belgium from 1837, and therefore he wasn't just facing the British, the Belgians, but also the British. And the German advance was halted in September, and then by December the front had stagnated to a 400-mile system of trenches running across the Swiss border to the North Sea for basically the next 4 years. Hindenburg takes over. He was a classic Junker. He becomes, as we'll see later on, or you should know, the president in the 1920s and 1930s. As you can see there, he was elderly even at this stage, but he was seen as a great hero because of his victories in the east at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes. Away from the war front itself, we normally think about the Germany in the 1923 economic crisis with the hyperinflation as a one-off, but it had been building up from well before the war. Taxation was not sufficient to finance the war, and proposals to raise taxes were vetoed on political grounds, and the fiscal privileges of Junkers continued unabated. Only 16% of the cost of the war was met by the taxation, and therefore there was a large budget deficit even before 1914. It was financed through printing of money and war loans, which led to already massive inflation. By 1918, the mark had lost 75% of its value. So this was feeding into the problems that Weimar was going to face from 1918 onwards. And also there's a fall off of real wages, as we can see there. Food shortages. The British had very successfully blockaded the German ports, despite the U-boats and the sinking of British shipping in the Atlantic. In retaliation, the British had, as I said, blockaded the German ports, and very little was coming in. And so therefore, with inflation and mounting casualties, this was beginning to have an effect on public mood. There was the turnip winter, very cold weather, poor potato harvest, led to fuel crisis and severe food shortages, with great deal of deaths on hypothermia and malnutrition. Infant mortality was up 50% by 1918. There was one last throw of the dice. There was an attack by the Germans across the board, through the lines, attacking the British and the French lines, and pushed very close to Paris, as you can see on this map here. This was stopped by the fact that the American troops filled the gaps and pushed the Germans back. At that point, the Germans realised that they could no longer win this war, and effectively started the countdown from August onwards towards some sort of agreement for a cessation of violence. If we look at the casualties of war, there you can see that Germany, because it was fighting on two fronts, had a great deal of casualties. Second only to Russia, as you can see there. Britain, on the other hand, is about 800,000. It's double the amount of German casualties, much larger than France even. You can see there the numbers of seriously wounded. This had a major effect on the German psyche after the First World War, when many soldiers returned back, both physically and psychologically damaged. And this fed into the idea that somehow that they were on the verge of winning, but somehow were stabbed in the back by the politicians. This is where this talk ends. The next one will focus on post-63 Germany. Thanks for listening.